Okay, everyone, please welcome producer Jonathan King. Thank you for joining us today. You've had quite a year. We've had Stillwater and now Swan Song.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, Stillwater we made in 2019, right? It finally came out. And that was, I mean, we were talking before about the process. We stopped post-production on Stillwater for 6 months. And that, I mean, I know we're here to talk about Swan Song, but Tom was really happy about that, and like pausing production or post-production sometimes can be really valuable. We had a 2-week hiatus when we were making Swan Song, sort of built in over the holidays, and Ben really made good use of it.
Well, you guys build a very unique world here. It's a brighter future, non-dystopian like we normally see about some, near future films. Can you kind of speak to the process of building that world? Was it daunting, exciting?
I mean, so much of it was on the page of what Ben imagined and the way he wanted to, like he's an optimist. I mean, even for an Irishman, and sometimes they're not. I'm half Irish, so I can say that. Like sometimes they're so dour, but he's a happy guy, and he wants to imagine that the future is full of possibility and comes with moral quandaries like this. But in imagining the world, we talked about this. Him and Annie Beecham, our genius of a production designer, we sort of thought about, technological change either is a revolution or an evolution. And we thought for 20 years into the future, what Ben imagined was sort of one revolution, which is you can clone yourself and transfer the memories. Like that's such a, I don't think that's happening anytime soon. And then wanted everything else to be an evolution of what is happening right now. Like I can imagine contact lenses that will show you your texts, or earpieces, and so driverless cars are already happening, things like that. He wanted the world to just feel real, like you could imagine it's 20 years except for this one thing. Which puts the whole thing in motion. So it was one revolution and a lot of little evolutions.
Well, yeah, there's no crazy, technology, that defies logic, really. Even the cloning process feels like it's based in reality. Was there a lot of research on upcoming tech and so forth?
Yeah, it was interesting also with Apple, because anything we were making or designing or building, we showed them, and that wasn't for like fact checking, is this possible or anything. It was like, are you working on something like this? Because, and if you are, we didn't use it. There were things that we wanted to do, and they were like, don't do that, because that'll be at the product intro in 6 years.
Signed an NDA, you're not allowed to talk.
So we were like, it was, sometimes it would just come back with a no, and we would like, oh, that means you'll be able to buy it soon.
Well, a big element is the augmented reality in it, and they've got the phones, the desktops, everything just kind of pops up. And they're so integrated into the characters' lives. And visual effects supervisors, Ajoy Mani, really, I felt, built out this seamless world. It didn't seem like computer graphics. Like, can you speak to his research and process?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of different companies at the end working on it in a lot of different countries. I mean, Ajoy was there from the first day of pre-production to the day we wrapped, and then moved to Ireland where they did all the post. And because it needed to be so seamless, if it looked fake, it would just bounce you right out of the movie. And so the way he worked very closely with both Ben, but also Masa, our DP, just so that the lighting and the shots were constructed in a way that it will allow him to do what he needed to do after. And then there were things like, the giant LED wall, which is sort of practical. Like you could look at that on the day, and they shot that. So that was not filled in after.
Well, you have the aspect of how connected the characters are, and there even is a small moment with almost like data privacy that pops up with the whole fact of like, Cameron not wanting his family to be watched. Was that a conversation had in pre-production, production on finding the balance of those issues that we even deal with today?
Yeah, I mean, we were constantly, when we shot the movie in Vancouver, and there was a 2-week quarantine period, so like across the border, and you go straight to wherever you're living, and you cannot leave the premises for 2 weeks. So, which was kind of great because they were there. They'd been there a bit, and they were all out of quarantine, so they were going on, location scouting and things like that. And like, I didn't want to go look at 11 dentists. There used to be a doctor scene, and they were looking at all these doctors' offices. And then one day I looked at the schedule for the scout, and it was like 11 or 12 dentist offices. I was like, I don't need to do that. I'm happy for my quarantine. But my point is that like every morning I would read the script again and just ask those questions, like, have you thought about this? But at a certain point, Ben, I think, came to a wise realization, which is that you can't, he'd thought about it so much, but you can't overthink as well, because if you start pulling threads, the whole thing will unravel. And you have to kind of go with an emotional logic rather than a science logic, really, in some ways. And if the emotional logic works and the big buy-in works, then you can sort of, like, could it happen? I don't know,
Yeah, no, and I've asking these questions on technology, but what I actually love is that you never like have to walk the audience through the technology. There's even the cloning process. We're not walking through the lab going like, now this is how we do this. You focus on the psychological and the moral and spiritual side of it. Can you talk about kind of going that route?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Ben was really interested in the movie, and Ben and Mahershala and everybody was not really, we didn't want to see the lab where they grow Jack, like, we didn't want to see that. Like, everyone was really, like, what Ben was after is this sort of exploration of mortality and, identity, really, and so that's where he kept leaning, and all the conversations were really about that. Like, the rules were set pretty early on what are we going to see, what are we not going to see, what are the rules of the world, and then beyond that, we just talked character and emotion. And it was real, like, for Mahershala, I mean, because there was an assumption going in, well, we're just going to shoot it both ways, and we'll turn the camera around, and he'll be fine. But he's playing two completely different, I mean, the same person becoming at different points in their sort of life, and he really needed time to prepare. So, which we found out, they found out pretty early on in pre-production, and adjusted the schedule accordingly, because it's not easy what he did. It's so subtle.
So he didn't just act one side, go change costume, and come back and act again?
No. The short answer is no, because he had to prepare, especially like scenes that are like one character is reacting to something on sort of a deep emotional level, and the other one is reacting in a completely different way. That takes a lot of prep for an actor. Not just hitting your marks or knowing your lines, but just the way he works personally. Like, everything plays in his eyes, and like, I mean, it's sort of what makes him captivating to watch on screen. That's like a lot of emotional prep. And so there was a guy named Shane who is an actor in Vancouver who was his sort of body double. And then we would shoot the scene with Shane, and Shane's a good actor, but he and Mahershala would have to go through with Mahershala telling Shane, this is how I'm going to play it. So Shane would then have to sort of play it how he would play Jack or Cameron how Mahershala was going to play it if Mahershala was playing opposite him. So it's like super, like the technology looks complicated. Ultimately, that either works or it doesn't. That part was complicated for him. It was amazing to watch every day.
Because that's the thing, is Jack is not just a clone that may have his own personality, has all the memories, and so they're very similar, but they have some subtle differences. And where was that on the process in pre-production with Ben and the writing and Mahershala coming on?
That was, I mean, Mahershala was on, because the way the movie was we were supposed to shoot, or I should say they were supposed to shoot, because I wasn't actually going to be able to go work on it. It was going to start in May of last year, and then it shut down and had to push. But Mahershala was on from, a year before that. So they had a lot of time. He had a lot of input into the way the script developed and how to think about the characters. And then, you're right, they're not the same person. They're a version of the same person for a while, and then they become the same person, I guess.
Well, and we all know and love Mahershala Ali. It's hard to believe this is his first leading role. He's always been
right?
supporting. So, and another aspect is that, race is never brought up in the film, but we rarely see black men in these types of roles. Can you kind of talk to Mahershala's approach to the character, which you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, when that didn't occur to me either until I was looking at the call sheet, and he's number 1 on the call sheet. And I think in True Detective, he was probably number 1 on the call sheet, but for a feature film, it was the first time. And it like every now and then, he'd just be like excitedly looking at the call sheet, which is so great that he's had so much experience and so much success, and he gets excited by still the process. One of the great things he brought as a producer and having a lot of time was Ben wrote the character probably thinking of himself in it, and Ben is, a nice white guy from Ireland. But once Mahershala agreed to do the movie, then everything had to sort of reflect the authenticity of a black family in the Pacific Northwest, and all of the details. What art is hanging on the walls? What books are we reading? It's not about race, but it has to be authentic to that, and to have the time to do that, and to have Mahershala, his producing partner Mimi, a couple other people like really involved in that process, I think, was just valuable. And we had time to do it and get it right, and have it not be, the movie's not about race at all. This could happen to anybody. And then it also had a kind of like knock-on effect when we were casting. We were like, let's just cast the best actor. Like gender, race, whatever. Like Glenn's character could have been a man. We wanted someone like Glenn Close, and it was like, well, let's go get Glenn Close. There's only one her, so let's go get her. And fortunately, she loved it. And then like Adam Beach and Lee, we weren't specifically looking for a First Nations actor when we cast Adam. He was just the best one for it. And Lee, same thing. JR, who plays the boss, we were like, he goes by he, but like we were like, we have to find a place for this actor. He's so charismatic. And we were like, all right, he can be the boss. And he's great, but we weren't looking for a trans actor from Australia of Filipino descent. We just were lucky that none of it mattered. It matters, but it doesn't matter. We were just casting the best actors.
Well, speaking of casting, Naomi Harris. So you bring her on. She's worked with Mahershala on Moonlight. Their chemistry on scene, no matter what emotion they're going through in the different timelines. Can you talk to the process of bringing them back together on screen?
Yeah. Well, they didn't actually work together. I mean, that's the thing. They were both in the same movie, but they never worked together. And they got to know when they worked together on stuff like this, like when the movie took off. So they were both super excited about doing that because they have such respect for each other as actors. they have different processes for sure. You know, Mahershala likes to prepare sort of a lot internally. Naomi likes to rehearse. I worked it out. And she's brilliant. We love her. You know.
Well, in her character, I mean, it could have been a very two-dimensional character, but it's multifaceted. We see multiple sides of her over the memories. Can you speak to us about creating the multidimensional Poppy character?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what her name was before it was Poppy. Like originally, everyone's name got changed in the casting process, which was something sort of Ben wanted to give to them. Like, what does this character feel like to you? I think he and Naomi came up with Poppy together. Yeah, there's like no one, we didn't want anyone to feel like they were just a device in the movie. And so much of what the moral dilemma at the center of the movie is for Cameron is involved in what is going on with her emotionally. So if you don't really understand that or believe it, then it won't be as impactful for his character. So kind of, Ben had to write a full three-dimensional whole person and cast an actor of Naomi's caliber to play it, or else the other side of the movie wouldn't work. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and jumping back a bit, like Ben Cleary, this is his first feature length. I mean, he won an Oscar for a short film, but this is his first feature length. And it was also, I read, it's a very cathartic writing process for him, a very personal story. What was it like working with Ben on his first film with such a personal sort of exploration of death?
He is a perfectionist and super detail oriented, and sometimes your worry about a first time feature director, because he was very, he was accomplished. He's made The Stutterer plus other short films and commercials and stuff like that. He's like, and he's not a kid. Well, he's young, actually. Every now and then I would be reminded of how young he is, but accomplished. And sometimes the worry is that they over prepare, and he was so prepared. He storyboarded everything. The first couple of days, you could see him sort of a little bit struggling with that, and actually Mahershala was super helpful to him in that, because Mahershala is like not just thinking about his own performance, but really keeps the big picture in mind, and helped Ben say like, you've got this all in your head, but now you have to also let it come to life. So he instilled a lot of confidence in us, myself and the other producers and the people financing the movie and the actors, because he was so prepared. But then the evolution to getting a movie that doesn't feel too labored or mannered is to let that preparation go a little bit. And he got there. It was he was a different director at the end of the movie than he was at the beginning of the movie, and it wasn't a struggle. It was like an evolution. So.
Right, and add on the level of, I mean, talking about death, grief, loss can be hard for a lot of people. Was that complicated from the get-go? Like, how was it working with the cast, but the crew also in exploring these themes?
It was interesting because we were shooting in the middle of COVID, and the protocols, both from the Canadian government and the unions and everything, were very strict, and we followed them beyond the letter, because sometimes people always like, what's the most important job of a producer? And I always say, like, first and foremost, being safe, like making sure everyone on the set is safe. And COVID like really brought that to the fore. It's not about, like the tragedy of what happened in Albuquerque with the DP getting shot on set, but it's like with COVID, it was every single day. So there wasn't the sort of easy camaraderie that can develop among film crews. Like, we didn't all sit together at lunch. Like when we were making Stillwater in France, like, I mean, lunch was an hour, and like just go on and on. Like we were drinking wine at the end of every day. You know, it was like different. And this movie, I think in some ways lends itself to a different kind of working experience. Like everyone was thinking all the time about what was happening on screen. And so it was a very quiet set. And there aren't a ton of people in the movie either. And so like, but it was very quiet and contemplative. And everyone was really grateful to be working, was really conscientious about being safe. But also I think just, I mean, the movie asks you to think about how you would, what would you do, you know? And think about things, like you said, like mortality. And you could sort of look around and people on set would be like, between takes, and you're like, are you thinking about the lighting setup? Or are you thinking about your parents? You know, it's like, it was interesting. It was a really interesting dynamic. It reflected what was happening on screen. There were a couple scenes, like in flashbacks, like the wedding and the party scene, where it was like, okay, everyone, now we're gonna have a good time.
Well, and so all the characters are at moments in the film alone. So it is interesting filming during COVID, but now as an audience watching it, you know, still dealing with COVID, what has your experience been with audiences connecting with that, the feelings of not just grief and loss, but of loneliness or melancholy or caring about family and, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think we've all been through, you know, now going on almost 2 years of that. And I don't know, the one worry I had is, are people done thinking about it? They don't want to think about it. They just want to go see Spider-Man. You know? And fortunately, the response we've got in the times that we've been able to screen it with people, and the feedback we've been getting is like, you know, it's made people reflect on, you know, I mean, when you get to a certain age, all of us have had to deal with loss and death, but I mean, certainly the last 2 years have brought out so much of that. People have wanted to think about it, and I think the movie prompts questions, but also so like gives you space to think about it, because there's a lot of quiet in the movie too.
Well, and what's interesting is, like, jumping back to some of the characters, Kate's character, played wonderfully by Aquafina, you know, is really Cameron's only friend, and maybe a mentor even. But you don't show us a lot of that. You see them together, but we don't get a lot of the conversation. There's a lot of silence with them. Can you talk about her bringing her on and her approach to her character?
Yeah, I mean, there was a version of that where we thought, you know, well, we've got Aquafina, she's so funny, like, we're gonna just let her go. But she actually was like, that's not what, I'm not here to ad-lib and do a comedy routine. And she was really interested in just sort of exploring the playing two characters herself. She's the other one who plays two characters. She was interested in that challenge, but also in just being a kind of like a little bit of levity, but being, you know, realizing that she is close to death and sort of contemplating that. She responded, again, it was like, well, who would be our dream cast? And we were like, Aquafina. And she responded with a yes so fast. It was like, people read the script and they were like, I'm in. You know, part of that is also like, I get to work with Mahershala Ali. Yes, please.
We all want to work with him, so. Well,
I recommend it.
Jumping to another amazing character, Dr. Scott. It's a complex character, Glenn Close. For most of the movie, you're unsure about her intentions. She's very easily could have been the villain, but she's not. Can you talk about bringing her on and her approach?
Yeah, she, you know, she asked, I think she probably asked this of every director, but she asked Ben, you know, like, why me? And what about this character makes you think I'm the right choice, which I think is a really great question for an actor to ask a director. And Ben's answer was that, like, I want someone who the audience, a couple of things. You believe that she's brilliant enough to run this whole thing. So you believe that about Glenn because that is actually true of Glenn. She's really, really smart. And he wanted someone you were unsure of their motive. And that ultimately at the end you find out that her motive is good, but that it could go either way. And because he didn't want to go down rabbit holes of creating red herrings of suspense and things like that, or a sense of like a larger looming conspiracy out there somewhere. So it really does have to reside in this character and her performance, and so you have to bring a sense of mystery and possibility either way, and belief that at the end she's a good person, and you believe that about Glenn because that's also true, So, but the uncertainty was something that was really important to him in casting the right actor. So,
Well, we talked a little bit about visual effects, but there's definitely other of the crafts I would love to ask you about. And Dr. Scott specifically has a costume that's a little bit different than everyone else's, which kind of adds to that. But your costume designer, Cynthia Ann Sumners, she comes in, like, even Dr. Scott has a lot of those sharp lines and that big necklace. Can you speak to the costume approach of the film?
yeah, I mean, well, almost all of Glenn's clothes are from this designer, Iskander, which is one of her favorite. So, like, also when you cast someone like Glenn, you're like, what's important to you? With someone of her stature, and she was like, what if what if she wore all of these clothes? And we were like, okay, because they're also they're organic. The color palette is a little intimidating, but they're very warm, and so which adds to the mystery again. And they're a little futuristic, but also not costumey. We didn't want anything to look costumey. And then with Cameron and Jack, it was really about color. That you had to differentiate the two of them, like who's wearing blue, who's wearing white, who's wearing gray, it's like, and then the rest of, also there's a 10-year passage of time between when Poppy and Cameron meet and then the present day. So Ben didn't want anything to really call attention to itself, just to sort of support the general look, and Cynthia was very good about that. And she had a great team. So,
well, there's definitely layers. You can see a hoodie that maybe someone could have today, but then a slightly altered coat. But I even love Cameron and Jack, as you mentioned, the tones. They start off one black, one white, and throughout the film they slowly reverse. How is that calibrating in the script and film?
Like the continuity sheet of the continuity board in the wardrobe department was huge, and just trying to keep track of who wore what when, it was crazy. For such a small, usually on a movie with a much bigger cast, it's complicated. This movie was complicated by the just that, making sure that the evolution of the look of especially the two characters between them. It's
even with hair and
it
makeup,
seems simple, but not.
Yeah, Poppy's hairstyles changed depending on time.
Yeah.
There's also two visual worlds, and director of photography Masanobu Takanagi, which you've worked with on Stillwater also, builds two visual worlds with the camera. Can you talk a little bit about his approach to that?
Yeah, it was really interesting, because having done Stillwater with him, where it was, poor thing, that movie, the camera was on his shoulder the entire time, always handheld. And this movie is much more composed, and he loves lighting, and this was a big lighting challenge because of so much of the effects were dependent on a real precision to the lighting. But also in reflecting the various moods of the characters, like how are they feeling warm. There was a definite look to Poppy and Cameron's house that was much warmer than the lab. But we didn't also want the lab to feel sterile and like not too blue. Like the lighting's not very blue. Like there's a very warm palette, and then you have exterior British Columbia, which when it wants to be beautiful, like there is no place more beautiful. And the weather was oddly cooperative to us. And we shot in the winter in Vancouver. I was like, it's gonna rain the entire time. And then it didn't. When we needed to go outside during the day, it'd be like, I don't know, like BC was really nice to us. The people were really nice, everybody, but the weather was really nice. They'd be like, okay, we'll let the sun come out today. I'm like, great, thanks.
So
we got lucky.
Much of the film and all the different departments, there is a kind of a duality. They're dealing with the similar themes in the narrative with the clones. But like speaking of the composer, so you have an interesting score by Jay Wadley, but also a very interesting curated soundtrack. Can you speak to the music?
Yeah, well, the soundtrack is like Ben is. He is a music junkie. Like I have not been to his place in Ireland, but like the collection of vinyl and CD, like he could be like a professor of music studies, really, and he's very precise about that. But then on the score, Jay came pretty late to it. Because Ben was so. He had such a direction in mind for the source music. He was more open to different ideas on who was going to compose the film, to the point where it got a little scary because we had not hired anyone. And so Jay came in and he wrote the score really fast. I had never worked with him before, but I hope this is not the last time because I think he wrote a beautiful score.
And I have to ask about Poppy's cover of Prince's Sometime It Snows in April. Can you give us any insight on how that was selected? And it's like perfectly placed in the film.
We knocked around a lot of different ideas for that. It's just, I mean, if you can use Prince, when you think about both like what the movie's about, what's authentic to the Turner family, and Prince having died recently. It was like, and it's one of Ben's favorite songs. Naomi loves it. It was just like if we could get it, it wasn't cheap, but it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, last question, but. I mean, you addressed it, but the film definitely leaves the audience asking themselves a question what they do, and also a divided audience. There's going to be people that agree with Cameron's stories and people that disagree. How is that? How have you been reacting with audiences? Conversations started after this film.
One thing that's interesting is the age of the person you're asking. And sometimes it's not what you think. Like I thought, because I'm older, I was like, well, obviously I would do it because I feel my own mortality coming faster. But sometimes, and so I would have expected that would be the case for people in my age cohort. It's different, like it's unpredictable. Everyone has a different answer. I have not found a through line that I can connect on any sort of statistical analysis that would hold up. It really is different for everyone and for completely different, super personal reasons, often, most of the time, in fact, yeah. Which I think is interesting. It's not what I would have expected.
Well, thank you so much for bringing the film and joining us today.
Thanks for coming, everybody.